Why are Russian oligarchs forming private armies? That's the question, folks. This is Fernando. Welcome to another video for the Modern Survivalist. And there may be a little bit more here than it seems. Let's check this out and comment later.
Now, reports from Russia suggest that Gazprom has set up its own private army and is sending recruits to fight.
So you have Gazprom, which is the big energy company from Russia. You have the Wenger Group, which is another one. And it's not the first time that they're operating. They've been operating for years all over the globe.
In Ukraine, the state oil firm has long employed people with military backgrounds to guard its assets around the world, but industry observers claim...
And keep in mind, this is quite different from what you see in the United States in terms of private and government. No, many of these companies, which are national state-owned companies, they actually have a guy on top running them that works as its own oligarch. So it's state-owned, but it's state-owned as long as it's in the hands of certain oligarchs that are aligned with the regime. So that's where private and public gets messed up.
Armed unit employed by Gazprom is now active on the front line. That appears to be confirmed by the head of Russia's paramilitary Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, in an interview as well. Well, let's discuss this further with energy analyst Mikhail Krutikin from Rosenergy. Thanks a lot for joining us on DW Business. Mikhail, is it really conceivable that Gazprom is sending people to the front line in Ukraine to fight?
Yes, this is the situation. In February, the Russian Prime Minister, Mr. Mishustin, ordered two companies of the Gazprom Group, Gazprom itself,
two companies of the
and
Gazprom
its oil arm, Gazprom Neft, to form something which is called volunteer battalions.
Anyway, you get the point. These are private armies that belong to certain oligarchs, that it's their way of signaling, you know, the support for Putin and the regime. So it's organized by these guys, these very rich oligarchs, but there's also something more here working at another level, which he talks about later on. Let me see if I can get this.
We're also seeing some reports that groups beyond just Gazprom, you know, Russian state-run organizations and otherwise setting up paramilitary groups, not necessarily in relation to, you know, the war in Ukraine, but actually for what might come afterwards.
Right.
I mean, what is it that they're anticipating?
Yes, this is, if you look at it from a longer term perspective, you see that, yes, there are some very rich people in Russia who are forming their own private armies, such as Andrei Bokharev, one of the co-owners of the Kalashnikov arm building concern, or Konstantin Malofeyev. They already have their own paramilitary groups. They are not engaged at the front line, but, well, they are in the formation stage. And the observers of the business community in Russia believe that such armies are being created for the future. Those people expect the Russian state, so-called vertical of power of Mr. Putin, to, well, to suffer under the pressure of economic, social, and military defeats. And they expect that under the most dramatic scenarios, there could be a civil war in Russia and a chaotic situation when such private armies would be needed to defend the interests of some very rich people, business elite, in some territories, business, well, producing sites, manufacturing factories, and so on. And this is, in fact, an anticipation of a chaotic situation in Russia. Maybe the downfall of Russia as a state.
Very interesting. I concur. I completely agree. It makes perfect sense. You form your own army, you have your own mercenaries, you send your quota in support of the regime, but you have your own army. This is anticipation of when Putin goes down. And all dictators eventually do. I mean, most likely it will be a military defeat, but eventually, even if the man just one day dies, which is what all human beings end up going through, eventually, once there's that vacuum of power, right? Once there's that vacuum of power within such a vertical structure as you always have in these dictatorships, well, there's fighting within. There's civil war, there's internal conflict, and the one that has the largest private army is most likely to be the one that prevails, or the one that finds alignment with some figurehead or some puppet or something that takes charge. Even if you do have someone, a strong man that rises from that mess, well, that strong man is probably going to be relying a lot on the support of some of these private armies. So this is a way in which these oligarchs, these warlords, if you want to put it that way, in a post-civil conflict, these armies are what ensure that these guys remain in power and they retain and keep their wealth. And it's not being taken over, but by someone else with their own private army. So yeah, this just goes to show how things work in some parts of the world, how they are anticipating for some of the potential or at least likely scenarios that they're contemplating. And yeah, it's interesting to be aware of all of this and maybe even take it into account for our own preparations in terms of what happens when things start falling apart. Maybe you don't have your own private army, but maybe you took some of my advice from Street Survival Skills and you organize with some of your neighbors and you're preparing just in case there's a little bit more chaos and anarchy out there in the streets when things start falling apart. Anyway, folks, it's going to be all for now. See you in our next video. Take care.